record so I don't forget.
Can you use that?
Yeah, I'm here. I don't know.
You sure?
Yeah.
I'll rip out the pages and give it back to you. Thank you.
Dr. Smith has put his slide deck for us, which have all kinds of juicy hyperlinks in them of neat things that he's going to go through. But he's put that in the top of the chat. So if you want to click on that chat and take a look at it, I'll make sure that it is also, I'll paste it in there at the end of the session as well. But we've got about 2 minutes and we will get started. Looks like we've got people are starting to join. Pictures of doggies, super cute. And Sean, I mean, if there is time here's how we will go, what our schedule looks like. We are scheduled for the closing ceremonies of these Inclusion Olympics here at 4:30. And they will, but if we, if you're still answering questions, I'll ask them to hang on to that for a minute. But we've got an hour and 45 minutes together.
So scheduled for 4:30. So the session's scheduled until, so you want me to finish about 4:15, 4:20? What time would you like me to finish by?
No, I mean 4:30 is fine. 4:30 is fine. I think I think by day 2 we're used to hopping straight into if people are able to go to the ending session.
Okay.
I just meant if we're scheduled till 4:30, which is totally fine. And if we hop past that a minute or two afterwards, I'll ask them to delay that 4:30 session just a second to give everybody time to hop out and head over there. All right. Oh, let's see. Oh, you resent the slide deck. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank
No
you.
worries.
All right, let's get started. How exciting. Hey, everybody. We have made it to the end of sessions and day 2. I hope everybody is having a great experience with this. It's great to see everybody hopping on here. It looks like we still have some folks that are hopping on. I will repeat, and I'm sorry if you guys have heard this 22 times in the last 2 days, but we are recording everything. And so one of the biggest questions we've gotten is how can I, get this information later or watch this again? So the attendee hub that you have been in for the last 2 days, when you would log on to, that's exactly where by day, I will tell you that's exactly where the recordings are. So I will tell you by tomorrow about noon, everything will be out there. We also take any of the information that the presenters have given us, and we also store it there as well. So that'll be available for 90 days. So sorry about that. I'm Susan with the Fire Foundation. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. Without further ado, I do want to turn this over to Dr. Smith. I will tell you that we're going until 4:30 Central Time today. And then we do have some closing ceremonies, if you will, a little closing session that will not be long at all. But if you are able to stick around with us and hop over to those closing ceremonies afterwards, we really, really, really appreciate everybody's time. This has just been over the moon exciting for us to host for you, and our deepest gratitude for you spending time with us. But the good stuff. Dr. Sean Smith, my friend, I hope I like to call him my friend, Dr. Sean Smith.
100%.
Hailing from the University of Kansas. He's a Jayhawk and a leader, rock star. I believe yesterday you were a Marvel character in the inclusion world. I think that's how I designated him.
I think you
anyway.
did. Yeah.
So he's going to talk to us today about technology. Thank you for being here, Dr. Smith.
No, that's great. And thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to be part of the closing here. So let me give you a little format. So let me share my screen. And as I'm sharing my screen, Susie, can you give a thumbs up? Can you see it? All right, great. So what I've done is inside the chat, and Susan, for those coming in, can always update that. That's a direct link to this Google slide. This is actually, I think I'm competing against a colleague of mine at the University of Notre Dame. who's doing an overview of universal design for learning. Well, we're going to do universal design for learning as well, because we're going to tie everything into that framework. I'm going to give you a reason why we're going to do that here in just a second. But as Susan mentioned, I'm a faculty member here at the University of Notre Dame, the University of Kansas. I'll get to Notre Dame in just a second. And so I work in the area of special education, but really focusing on all learners. And so before we get too far into it, though, for those that don't know me, you may be saying, but yeah, Sean, this is on Catholic education. What are your Catholic credentials? So let's make sure we're on the same page there. I've been fortunate enough to work with FIRE in the past. That doesn't make me the Catholic credentials there. So let me go a little bit further. I've been fortunate enough to also work with the Kansas City, Kansas Archdiocese. And actually, one of the reasons I got started with the Archdiocese, and Kathy O'Hare, the former superintendent, I'm not sure if she remembers that. I remember when I first met her. I have a son with Down syndrome who's now about to go to KU, the University of Kansas. We have a 2-year program for those with intellectual disabilities. Anyways, when he was about to enter into elementary, we went down to our local parish, and our local parish kind of told us this wouldn't be a good fit. We don't serve, in a way, the Nolans of the world. And so Kathy O'Hare got a call saying, hey, Kathy, my name is Sean. What's happening? And so I've been working with the Archdiocese ever since, fortunately. I'm a Dominican by train, not a Dominican father, but a Dominican trained individual from Providence College, and one of 7. I have 6 sisters. And one last thing in terms of my Catholic credentials, in terms of the Holy Family, we have Maureen Ruth, a derivative of Mary, Sheila Marie, Mary Bridget, Margaret Mary, Catherine Mary, and then my little sister is Patricia Ann. That's a whole nother story. So of course, my middle name is Sean, not Mary, but Joseph, the Holy Family, Mary and Joseph. My mom had a very deep relationship with the Mother Mary, and I'm trying to develop one. And that's enough about our Catholic credentials. Let's move on, okay? So to get started, all right, what I wanted us to think about is, go back to March, almost a year ago. And I know, Nightmare City, I'm with you. But where I'm going with this is, and this is hyperlinked, by the way, and a lot of these resources are hyperlinked, folks, meaning that if you're on the slide, just click and you'll go to 350 plus amazing online learning tools. And oh my gosh, aren't we still getting a good number of digital tools? And I know many of us have tried these tools. Many of us have become very comfortable with certain tools, and yet there are always more. And so as we think about these list of tools or list of technologies that we've been able to begin to use, but maybe haven't maximized them, or when we're thinking about all learners, have we really thought about the design and planning for all those needs? And that's what I want to focus in on today. But to begin with, it's, well, how do we organize that list of all those different technologies? And I mentioned a moment ago, I want to do that through the Universal Design for Learning framework. So we're going to do a little both of ABCs of UDL, but also how we integrate the framework within elements of these digital tools. So with that said, of course, we have so many learning management systems we're using. Many of us are Seesaw or Google Classroom or Blackboard. And of course, many of us have been face-to-face. So we're using these maybe for temporary remote, or we're using these for that hybrid, or we're using these management systems in various ways, but hopefully to be able to support those learners that we're not able to maximize our face-to-face time with because they've got masks on, or they're at a distance, or some of them are with us and some of them are down the hall. And so how do we meet all their needs? Well, technology has been fitting in to assist us with there. And of course, I want to talk about learning management systems, and I will in several ways, but I want to kind of move on here. All right, my focus today is I want to connect these various digital tools right there in the center, but I want to do it strategically with what we're doing instructionally wise, as well as what we're doing learning wise. And to make that connection, I want to do so through a number of different ideas. And again, as I mentioned, through primarily the framework. But as we're getting started here, one of the things that I think, and I mentioned this in our keynote yesterday, if you were with us, is I think one of our silver linings, when we actually get beyond this and really start to think about it, I think many of us have been planning and designing for variability over the last year of learners that we didn't realize elements of that variability. And what I mean by that is we didn't realize some of the, not only strengths they have, but also the supports we were providing that we didn't realize we were providing. And now at a distance or socially distanced or whatever, that prompting that was kind of every day, we're realizing, oh goodness, that's really critical. And so those executive function skills that we thought were there, that were maybe just kind of integrated into our instruction, that now are becoming so much more relevant: distraction, attention, memory, focus, organization, the list of things, working, long-term, short-term memory. Those things are becoming much more relevant, and we're realizing a little bit more variability. We're definitely seeing on the social emotional end. I was just listening to, I was on the campus of the University of Kansas teaching face-to-face, and then drove home to be able to do this presentation without a mask, because when I'm on campus, I need to have a mask on. And anyways, I was listening to a review of getting ready for next year, not only the catch up, but also that social emotional for so many of our learners. Even if they have been face-to-face with us the entire time, there's been a lot of stress and a lot of challenges there. So where I'm reinforcing that is there's been a lot of variability. And I think that's been a potential good thing in the use of some of these technology tools, and I want to reinforce that. But also the awareness of learning variability, to me, for inclusion purposes, is I'm now more aware of potential some barriers that maybe I wasn't as aware of in some of my design and learning previously. Maybe it was that overdependence on reading that now I'm realizing without some of those supports, gosh, I'm having to help with some of that organization for notes, or get the right information out, or maybe it's just the phonological development that needs to be practiced, or maybe it's the comprehension component, or maybe it's supporting that fluency. But that's just in reading. There's a number of barriers that we're really dealing with that, again, planning for variability will help. So in a way, the digital solutions that I want to talk about today, and I know you're listening to me, and I can make this a little bit more interactive, but in all honesty, I want to cover a lot of geography. So I'm going to try to do the best I can with these different resources. And so first of all, I want to share with these digital technologies and solutions, but with the purpose of simply not offering solutions, but in reference to the fact that we have a variety of learners, typically developing, as well as those with disabilities. We have a lot of barriers, and of course, barriers have been created for us that we didn't want. In terms of this pandemic, but barriers exist even when we go back face to face, without the social distance, without the mask. And of course, there's a number of different strategies that many of us have adopted, but I want to kind of reinforce some. So with that, let's think about some of those barriers. Many of us have them, right? In terms of our learners, we have students on the reading area, on that first column, where they're struggling with vocabulary and comprehension. Identified students, definitely, but non-identified students as well. Maybe some of our English language learners, or some of our learners that just aren't as fluent with reading. We have definitely, when it comes to writing, that the organization, the sequencing of information. We've got all these ideas. How do we get it down? Then, of course, the whole mechanism of drafting and the mechanics of that. We have that executive function area that I mentioned earlier, that we really want to develop that self-regulation ability, right? We really want to be able to have them to be, self-planners and organizers, be able to control their time management. I just did an activity with my college students today, and out of, I don't know how many I have, almost 30 students, significant majority time management is a continued flaw. And these are pretty high-performing juniors on campus. Motivation, though, of course, right? Engagement, of course, can go in that grit, that self-regulation, ability to self-monitor. All those elements can be provided as barriers or challenges within the individual, right? And then you throw in this COVID, throw in potentially hybrid or learning at distance, face-to-face, or all the different variations you're seeing in your buildings, depending upon the week, depending upon the month, right? So with that said, what do I do in terms of connecting those digital learning with a bit of a pathway, a bit of a map? And this is where, to me, the framework comes in perfect. Now, those of us familiar with the framework, awesome applesauce. Those of us that are a little unfamiliar with it, I'm going to do a brief connection, and then we're going to run with it, all right? And so with that, Universal Design for Learning, as many of us know, and as I reinforced yesterday, if you were there for the keynote, we have those three primary areas, those principles. And of course, we want to be able to provide, in this presentation, digital tools that enhance multiple means of representation, multiple means of being able to demonstrate what I know, and of course, engagement. Now, with that said, to me, this visual represents very quickly, for those of us a little unfamiliar with the framework, and those of us that are there that want to get reinforcement, many of us have seen this, right? And we've seen it with the fences there, and the fence is necessary, right? The fence is there to protect the fans from the players, and that's all important. But the big thing in terms of this fence is that it's there, but it's also in the way. So we need to create products, right? Those boxes, and someone's creating those, And in the school setting, someone's creating the accommodations and the resources and the things that go on there. But from a UDL perspective, we're going to keep that fence for the protection, but we're going to design it differently. We're going to make it transparent. Boxes go away, that extra accommodations go away. And I think in our digital tools, that's very much, very, very relevant. So with that said, as a brief reminder, of course, the framework can be seen two different ways at least, and that is those vertical in terms of the engagement, representation, and action expression here, right? But we can also see it, of course, across the horizontal. And by the way, my mouse is turned into a mouse because it is hyperlinked to the CAS website to really go into all that detail about the UDL framework if you're interested in learning about more, and of course, all the examples they provide. But for my purposes, we're going to think about digital technology several different ways. So for example, an engagement, we can think of it in the area of recruiting interest, the work that we do or the tools that we use to recruit interest. But we're doing it, right? We're pedaling and the students are sitting in there kind of watching, waiting for us to do the engagement and all that. And many of us have really been taxed with that and spent a lot of energy on that. What we need to do, right, is facilitate persistence. So when we think about some of the digital tools, how can we create them to allow for the individual some independence? I'm going to give some examples of that, where they're bicycling and we're giving them a little support like those training wheels. But of course, what we want to do with the technologies is facilitate that level of full self-regulation. And so they're off on their own 10-speed working along. And of course, we can do this for multiple means of representation. We can do this for action expression, everything from we give some tools for access when it comes to perception, all the way down to giving strategies for comprehension and everything in between. So with that said, let's kind of take each of these areas and break it down with some technologies. And we're going to use some oldies and goodies. And if you've been with me before, you're going to see a few familiar things, but we're also going to see some different things. And so with that said, when we think about that online representation or digital representation, we're going to go beyond access, because oftentimes we stop at access, and access is great for someone who has a sensory or a physical disability, but not too helpful at all for my son with Down syndrome who has cognitive or students with learning disabilities or autism and the like. And so when we think about that, we think of it from a content perspective, right? What we're using to teach, all those materials and resources, but also from a teacher perspective, what we're directing, what we're presenting, instructing, giving information about, the list of things goes on. So when we think about those types of things, and by the way, this is a link directly to representation in those three areas, and this is more for your future access. When I think of challenges, I think of everything from our directions, and maybe they weren't paying attention, maybe they weren't connecting with that. So what do we need to reinforce those directions, make them more visible, make them available for those rewinds? You know, there's less opportunity this year with questions, clarification, prompting, review. There's been limited prompting, of course, on our part as well, right? In terms of the variations of prompting. And finally, there's been more of a role of the family, which I think Catholic education is so prime for, but we also have a lot of families that are under a lot of stress. And so to look to the family while they're also under a lot of stress, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. And yet that's been an element we've had to kind of look to. So with that said, to me, of course, and many of us have already done this, and that is, I'm going to create materials. I could use Google Docs for this, and this is an example here, but I can use other LMS features. And many of my LMS features like Google Classroom or Seesaw or others, my learning management system, they offer docs, they offer visuals, they offer calendars, they offer audio, they embed elements. And in this example here, I'm basically giving you instructions that maybe I offered to you face-to-face verbally. I'm trying to say verbally out loud, but I also am going to put it there on my learning management system, stored there for you to take a look at, but also for you to go and review later as a reminder, especially those students with attention issues or language processing issues. But those individuals that need additional assistance, mom or dad can go and take a look at them. Or maybe the aide down the hall is utilizing that to remind themselves what we wanted them to do independently. So of course, there's a variety of different ways we can provide these step-by-step instructions and directions. Now, many of us are doing it. So Sean, why are you reinforcing it? To me, come August, September, when hopefully things are much more closer to normal, I'm using this still because this is in my learning management system, or this is somewhere on my website that I'm going to share this because this is a great tool to facilitate inclusion. It's a great way for me to still be able to not worry about the additional time I might need to take for an individual to personalize it, because it's available to them now in multiple ways and available to them when they need it. Now, I've used a lot of video over the last year. I was a video user prior to, and I'm going to be a video user after. And I now, with anything in my coursework, and this is a great inclusionary experience, of course, is I'm going to, if it's of relevance and it's something I shared face-to-face, by the way, what I just shared today, I have created video for my students, as well as generally directions if it's relevant, if it's something, if it's a big idea, an essential element, directions for a project, step-by-step elements of the rubric. I'm creating a video breakdown. I'm using those editing software tools we've all become familiar with, and I'm going to reinforce a few more. And I'm creating some scenarios, so I'm putting them up where everything from YouTube, which is free to me, or into my Google Classroom or my Seesaw. I use Blackboard or Canvas or Schoology, wherever my management system is, I have access to. If I don't, YouTube is a great resource. Might be blocked at school, which I don't think it is anymore, but it's available at home, and I can create channels, and a lot of educators have created channels. Or Vimeo is another one where I could create resources there. Reach out to me if you're unfamiliar how to do that. Be happy to help you with. Now, there's a number of different technologies to use. Okay, now Common Sense Education, that's a hyperlink there. That will take you to a variety of ways to use video and a number of tools that help you utilize video. Common Sense Education walks you through it, and video is so relevant for our struggling learners. They can see it, they can visualize it, and the learners that are trying to, or the workers, the peer mentors, or the faculty members, or the parents, or the grandma and grandpa in the home that are looking to, wait, what were those directions? Wait, what was the illustration? Wait, what were the steps? They can then take a look at it and then, of course, personalize it and be empowered to help that child. Now, of course, there's a variety of different tools here. I've hyperlinked to several of them. To me, when I consider these, and I think we're still there, and that is, I'm there right now. I'm doing some additional technology video work that I haven't done over the course of this last year. I want to do some additional features. I want to offer some more editing that I haven't been pushing myself on. Well, I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try to find a resource. And when I find that resource, I'm going to think about what I want to do with that resource. And I'm going to emphasize this as we go along with video. But real briefly, folks, right now I'm trying to do editing, and some of these things don't edit well. So I'm going to kind of say, well, you know, it's a great tool. It's been reinforced to me, but if I can't edit for the needs of my learners, I'm going to another tool, and Common Sense Education gives me a list of them for consideration. Now, in addition, though, I'm going to use video to chunk information, because they say chunking information, like with Edpuzzle, in terms of the fact that the video with a question, or I'm going to embed some comprehension questions like Khan Academy does, but I'm going to potentially do it with an old video that I create, and then I'll pause, I'll say stop, and then I'll create maybe a Padlet they'll go off on, or maybe it's something that they'll do in a small group virtually, or in a breakout room, or they'll do actually face-to-face. I may prompt with a video for a pause of what you need to do next. So I'm just not going to simply say, watch this video and go to work. I know many of us are doing this as well. But I'm also going to provide a resource bank in terms of examples, ways that students can utilize a variety of different tools that go along with it. Now, interactive whiteboards, I think, are a great way to visualize this. And Padlet, Jamboard, those are nice interactive whiteboards where I can put up information and use it in a variety of ways. I've hyperlinked some examples here to further provide kind of resource banks, because they also offer you to embed video as well as additional information to facilitate that learning. Now, in addition, just to kind of remind us back to the framework here, and this is more for you to take a look at to make the connections if you're not getting it verbally. And that is, I'm trying to support reading comprehension, right? And reading has so many different integral parts. So of course, many of us are already using, and we have been using, and if you've heard from me in the past, of course, we're going to be using text-to-speech applications. ReadWrite is my go-to. It's on Chrome, it's on my browser, it's on my iPad, it's on my Mac. It will highlight the word as I'm reading it. And more, of course, we're using more digital text. Why? Because now our students are having access to these devices. And instead of sending home that textbook, which many of us are still, the digital text is available, which provides lots of options. And one is, of course, the text-to-speech can highlight the text and read it out loud at the pace and volume that the child needs. So I don't get that opportunity to read with the child like I used to. Text-to-speech can mimic that to a degree. So that's certainly something I'm going to look at. Now, there's variations of that. So first of all, the read write, which of course, hopefully many of you are using, offers lots of functionality to it. Yes, it plays and highlights and reads the text to speech, but you can also take notes and chunk information and also do speech to text if you want to. Now, by the way, read write is one of many. I'm only emphasizing this one as an illustration. And I hope as you've been utilizing your text to speech tool, you've realized the additional tools that allow that multiple means of representation. Well, what do you mean, Sean? Digital text that's being read out loud, I'm good. Well, actually, no, I'm not good. And I want to reinforce this, and I embedded this here for you to watch at your leisure. But I'm going to go ahead and get started here because this is the same tool, the read write. It does the same thing in terms of highlighting text as you're reading it, but so much more. And so many of these tools do this. So here's one example. So let me get it started here. And I'm going to move forward here just
A
there.
vocabulary list from individual words or terms. To use in a Google Doc, just use the colored highlighters to highlight individual vocabulary words. Then click the vocab button. This will automatically create a new doc in your Google Drive containing a vocabulary chart. It includes dictionary.
Okay, folks, so I'm gonna move on. And Susan, if there's questions that you're seeing in the chat, you ask away, no worries on my part. Folks, this doesn't just have to be in Google. I could be on a digital text that I'm reading, could be a digital textbook that I can grab images from, words from, etc. I'm highlighting those words. It will automatically bring it over into a Google Doc. In the Google Doc, it is a Google Doc. I can do whatever I want with it. First of all, it'll take the term, it'll automatically define it, and it will put in an image. But I can change that image. I can modify the text that is the question, the definition. I can put in notes over here so that I could make notes on what that vocabulary is relevant to, and so much more. Okay, but you know, it does some other things too. Wait, do I have another one? Oh, I wanted to offer another visual. I may have, oh, I have another visual here. So the vocabulary, but this is the one I wanted to share first, and this is chunking information. Here we go.
From docs and websites. The highlighters on the Read and Write toolbar can be used on the web to identify key information as you're reading. To use, just select some text and click a highlighter button. Your highlights can be extracted into a new Google Doc using the Collect Highlights button. Just choose which colors you want to include and how to sort them, and click OK. This will automatically generate a new doc in your Google Drive containing your highlights, as well as a link back to the original source.
Now, on that example, if you're not getting, if you haven't seen this and you're not getting excited, then I'm not sure what excites you, because when I'm thinking of it, with all those learners I've worked with for years, we've been utilizing elements of this. And by the way, there's several tools that do this. This is one, read write. But think about it, I'm reading through, I'm not sure of this information, I'm trying to take notes. I can then grab it and automatically place in the Google Doc. Now, if I'm working and structure it well, I, as an instructor, can start looking at what you're doing from a note-taking perspective. So not only you are able to grab instead of write or type information, it automatically puts it in there. It hyperlinks it back to wherever you're grabbing it from a digital resource. But then as an instructor, I can take a look at, oh my gosh, you were highlighting everything. No, 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 no. I asked you to grab the main idea. What were you thinking? No, of course, we wouldn't do that. But the idea that, of course, then I can provide additional assistance and provide just-in-time reinforcement for some of my struggling learners. These are tools that I think, again, beyond the pandemic, they don't go anywhere. They're critical. Now, of course, I mentioned the fact that read write is the one of several. Snap and read does the same thing. Snap and read is a little different in that for text that's not text. What are you talking about, Sean? You know, those sites you come to that are more PDF related and they're an image and not a text. Well, it will convert it and use it as if it's text and do very much similar to what read write does. If we're not using Bookshare to get our text, there are over 1 million resources right now, and it doesn't look like I hyperlink to that. I did hyperlink to it on an earlier slide. And on Bookshare, and I'll reinforce that right now to make sure we're telling the truth, here it is. And oh, I didn't, you know what? I will change it, folks. And that is Bookshare. For those of us already familiar with it, if I have a child that has a disability, so IEP, whatever you're writing up for a disability, And reading is an area of need. Let me say that again. If I'm working with a child that has reading as a need and has a disability, this is free to them. Over 1 million books, essays, you name it, that's been digitized. If it's not there, you ask for it now, it'll be digitized in the next month or two, definitely for the next academic year. It has its own text-to-speech reader, but it's digital text that then you can utilize as you see fit. It's a great resource it was designed for those learners I just mentioned. But of course, digital books that many of us have been exploring and using. Book Creator is my friend. I'm not sure about you, but Book Creator, as well as many others, allow us to digitize that text, right? It allows us to take the text that we want in terms of a book, and it allows us to put it into the digital book format, sequence it, organize it. And of course, many of these tools offer several supports. So for example, I can take a text of my own that maybe Flat Stanley would read, and then I can create my own version of Flat Stanley. Why would I want to do that? Well, I could level the text for a less struggling reader, or less struggling reading needs, therefore for a struggling reader. I can put in more images that I think are relevant to my readers. I can personalize my voice. I could record my own voice if my students would like to hear that voice. I can embed video in many of these digital books that I'm mentioning here. So all of a sudden, this digital book becomes so much more than a book. Yes, I'm going to have to invest some of my time, but we've been doing this prior to the pandemic, and of course, post-pandemic as well. But these digital books, there's a lot of them out there, and a lot have grown over the year because so many teachers are using that, definitely at the elementary middle level, to create books that are more personalized to the learner. And they're not creating it for one learner, they're creating it and then multiple learners can utilize it. But of course, people are doing that as well. Tar Heel Reader has several thousand books, very basic books. You preschool, you early elementary folks, you folks that are trying to work with students, let's say with autism and Down syndrome or intellectual disability that really struggle with reader, this was created for them. It actually was created for people with Down syndrome, intellectual disabilities, and autism. That was a primary audience this was created for, but great for primary elementary. I'll let you look at this at your leisure, and I've hyperlinked it to there. You can create your own book, but more importantly, there's a several thousand book library. Okay. Pictello, oh my gosh, are there apps out there? Yes, and many of you have used apps. But again, back to my example a moment ago, Pictello allows you to record your own voice. It allows you to also have it text to speech. You can put in your own images. You can put in your own video. It is an app that sits on a number of different devices. It's great for telling stories. And the beautiful thing about it is to create it, and this is my transition over to, and I'll reinforce it. If I want to create my own books, me as a learner, it actually gives me, look at that screenshot. It gives me the ability to do word prediction. So as I type in a term, it will give me a list of words. It will give it to me audio output, and it also sequences my book, meaning here's the first page, now here's the second one, and it prompts me with what things should be on that page. Pictello is one of several tools that do that for our learners. All right, I know I'm sharing a bunch, and I apologize for the pace. So I've given you some resources here. So this is under the general idea of accessibility and readability. So there's several Chrome extensions, Mercury Reader, Just Read, and Read Mode that do that. There are some decoding and fluency ones. I mentioned Snap Read, but also Natural Reader and Fluency Tutor help that sounding out and that listening aspect just in time. And there's also a number of tools that are Chrome extensions plus that offer comprehension supports. And that would be, of course, helping the learner beyond just their decoding and into their fluency comprehension. So those are some, there's many more, but those are some to consider and review. And those are all hyperlinked and available via this presentation. All right, I hope what's happened is some of you have stopped listening to me and you're off playing with the different resources. That's awesome applesauce. For those of you still with me, there's more. So there's suites out there increasingly, right? That are being created that can do reading, that can scan, that can write. Voice Dream Suite is one. Now don't quote me on that price. Prices do seem to be changing lately, but it has a reading mode, it has an audio mode, it has the grabbing in terms of visual controls, it has the support in terms of highlighting, and a host of other things. So depending upon your reader, this is a great suite that is available then for your selection, depending upon what you're trying to do.
Sean, there's a question from Tanya about using It was a couple minutes ago. I'm so sorry. So
That's all right.
Tanya,
What's the
Tanya,
question?
Tanya, I'm sorry if I don't have, you were thinking about using this with close reading. Could you maybe type in there for us which
Yeah.
tool? Yeah.
Okay, so Sean, I'm working with middle school students that are low readers right now. So
Okay.
we're really going to focus on closed reading and text evidence. So I was trying to think of a way to make it a little bit, I hate to say more fun, but easier for them also because we are in person. So
Sure.
when you were doing the highlighting in the text, I was wondering if that was a good strategy to use with those kids in the closed reading strategy. Or is it more important for them to be actually doing it?
Well, I mean, depending. So when you say you'd use it, give me an example of what you're thinking.
Well, I was thinking like when they're told, okay, this is the question, now go back and find text evidence to prove it. And they could go back and they could highlight the text.
Yes.
Like that's what I was kind of thinking.
Sure. So in that manner, and I was trying to figure out if it was the student or you. So yes, certainly in that manner, yes. And by the way, if they highlight it in like read write, it would automatically bring it over into a doc so that then if you wanted to quickly take a look, several different things could take place. If they have that digital, they could simply share with you that link that's automatically provided and you could take a look very quickly. Oh, did you actually answer that question? You can also look over their shoulder, but you could be at your spot from a social distance perspective. They could all be sharing those links with you and you could very quickly see whether or not they're actually following that strategy based on the text that they grab based on the question you asked. But
Okay.
independently, they could also do that as well. The neat thing about like read write also is that you could ask questions that would align with certain types of information you want them to grab. So for example, a question relevant to a certain area when it may be towards, let's say, the main idea, whatever, could be yellow, to maybe questions that they're trying to answer that are more thematic, that could be purple. And then the highlighter gives different colors, and therefore, based on what you're asking them to do, you could have them organize that by color, which of course, from a learning strategy perspective, now you're helping them color code things,
Right.
but also you're able to see whether or not they, okay, yeah, they're great when it comes to some of the thematic stuff. Ooh, when it comes to some of these other elements in terms of making inferences, that's a little bit more of a challenging for them based on the information they're pulling. And they color code that for your perspective. So
Okay.
that's probably beyond, it is beyond that strategy, but sorry, my mind went.
No, it's fabulous because I have extremely low learners and extremely high learners in the same classroom. And so what you just said, I could do with both. So thank you very much.
Yeah. So for example, my son Nolan used a variation of this and snap and read and a couple other technologies. And his intent was he was supposed to read for certain questions. And his reading at the time, variations. He ended up about 6. I think he's regressed actually with this pandemic, but comprehension wise, he was probably a 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade variations using this. And so pulling out materials that were relevant to vocabulary, pulling out materials relevant to specific questions, main idea particularly, were all very relevant. And he used this along with several strategies, but it was a great way. I used it particularly with him. His teachers weren't as open to the technology, but it was a great way for me to better understand, was he making connections with the text? What the teachers were often asking them to do was asking him to write. And so he had a strategy sheet that he was using, but the problem is writing became the task for Nolan. If you can see me, I'm holding my pencil or pen. And that's a whole nother thing I'm asking Nolan to do. And so it turns into a writing task versus a reading task. And where this is just a copy and paste, which it keeps it into a primarily reading task. So.
Yeah, and it helps those struggling readers when they're like, you're asking me to read and to find things and to write it, and I can't do it. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
No worries. Great question. So I apologize, folks. My legs need to be, I'm going to stand up here and I'm going to continue on. And thank you for that break there, Tanya. So now we're going to switch over to this idea with the principle of, okay, they are comprehending it, they're grabbing it, they're understanding it at a level. How do I allow them to demonstrate? And I know many of us, I've got a sister, I'll use her as an example. She teaches in the Arlington Archdiocese, all face-to-face, and she's actually in a diocese that is surrounded by public schools that have been online pretty much all academic year. And she's like, the Catholics know how to do it, and we certainly do. But assessment has been a major change for her because of the fact that time. And so she's maximized the time in terms of instruction, but from assessment, she's decided that's something that they can do a little bit more independently. But then how do they demonstrate it? And also, now this isn't my sister talking, but I've heard others say, how do we also make sure that the student's doing it at home as an extension and in the evenings and the weekends versus mom and dad? And I know none of us have that problem, but I think some of us do. But anyway, so let's think about that action expression in terms of the UDL framework. And again, I want you guys to understand beyond simply the principle, for those of us unfamiliar with the framework, there are 3 guidelines to each principle, and there's checkpoints that go along with it that illustrate it, that facilitate it, that make us understand it better. And so I just want to give you, these are links, hyperlinks in the Google platform that I've given you so that you can access those at your leisure. So let's think of this. And again, this is more for your reference later on, but very quickly, we're thinking of writing, right? We're thinking of understanding. We're thinking of being able to follow the step-by-step instructions. Come on, it's in the rubric. Come on, I've given you those directions 24 times, whatever it may be. All right, so I know none of us say that. I think it sometimes. But anyways, let's move on. There's a number of different challenges, a number of different technologies allow us to do it. So let's start first back to what I mentioned a moment ago, and that is the digital books. So Book Creator was one, but there's several of them. And what I like about this is the fact that now the learner could use the sequence that I mentioned earlier. The learner could use some of the tools I mentioned earlier, depending upon their level. The learner could use the supports and then the structure to put in text, but also images, video, and the like. Now, some of these will cost, okay? Some more robust ones will have a charge to it. Others are free, and I mentioned a few in an earlier slide that are for free. So you have to take a look at what your need is. But I can tell you the Nolans of the world, individuals with intellectual disability, if you give them structure and give them guidance, a sequence in that you need to put something here, this is the title page. Well, what does the title have? It has some words and an image. Oh, okay, let me see if I can. Now I've been getting some structure instead of a white page or a page with some prompts. I'm getting those prompts built in, embedded in a number of these digital tools. Now, again, I'm not recommending using this first as demonstration. I'm using this first as representation, and then I can facilitate depending upon my learner. Now, also, many of us are using tools like infographics. Canva has become a best friend for several folks. It has a lot of different things we can use to create infographics and different templates. Almost all of them are for free. They're automatically built in, and then we just copy and replace. And it's a great way to visualize step-by-step instructions, etc. But also comic books are a great way to visualize things. They sequence things one panel at a time, but also not only for us to create, but for the learner to create, so that we can do things to facilitate that understanding, but students could do the things to demonstrate that understanding as well. So again, the students can describe a step-by-step process. Maybe it's the elements of photosynthesis. Maybe it's an elements of a certain science component, the big ideas, the essential ideas. The host of things goes on there. And if we had more time, or if we could combine Christy and myself, who's doing that overview of universal design for learning, one of the things I'm assuming is this academic year is we focus in on what's essential. We focus in on our big ideas. It's another element of universal design for learning. And in so doing it, that's what I'm going to want them to demonstrate in the resources I provide. So not everything, just those big ideas, those essential elements. Now, I believe things like Google Classroom and Google Slides are just optimal for this. And what am I talking about? Well, Google Slides, many of us know this, right? Of course, Sean. Yeah, but many of us are probably doing this as well, just in case. Think of it. I create a slide deck. I'm inside Google Classroom. It's all built in. No one can get, well, very limited opportunities to get lost in there. And let me reinforce that. Okay, I'm going to go sideways for a moment. For those that can see me, I just moved sideways for a moment. But where I'm going with this is the fact that Google Classroom is embedded, right, in terms of if I get into the tool, if I get into the slide, and I start making modifications, I don't have to worry about saving it. It will stay in Classroom if I've organized it that way. Nolan was a user of this and still is a user of it. And I drank the Kool-Aid back about 6 years ago with Nolan because I'm watching a kid with limited intellectual abilities navigate and utilize those supports because the teacher created it well. But let's talk about slides. Inside the slide, I can provide a template for directions. Inside this slide, I can provide text, visual, video. I can organize that on slides. Then the student opens it up, or students open it up together. They take a look at it. They see my directions. I'm not there with them. I'm over with someone else. Or I'm socially at a distance, or I'm hybrid, whatever it may be. The student is then being able to navigate what I'm expecting of them. It could be very basic. It could be sorting colors. It could be sorting shapes, because I put the shapes on the Google slide and I've given them some verbal directions in an audio file. They complete the task. They can delete my directions, my text, my audio, my video. And then I have the slide. I open it up and I see they sorted things. I see that they visualized a process for me on a series of slides. I see that they actually created a presentation, although that's just one of several things I can do here. Now, I'm going to get ahead of myself, and I'll just say it now. And that is, I can also collaborate. And so therefore, I can create this as a collaborative activity with students that could be live synchronously. They could be looking at each other from afar in the classroom, and they're both adding things, or they can be sitting as close as they can to each other. But the other thing is they could be remote doing this. And the beauty about it is I can pop in and take a look. So they could be synchronously doing this, but they could be asynchronously doing this. Someone adds something in the classroom, someone later on in the afternoon adds something else. And the beauty is I get to take a look at it, give informative feedback. So that's a great way to engage learners, right? Collaboration leads to engagement. All right, so there's a number of other opportunities in terms of practice. Let me pop into a few other things. Many of us are using audio clips. There's voice memo and voice recorder for that. Of course, many of our video tools will allow you to videotape without the video. What, Sean? It allows you to record without the video. So therefore, it turns into an audio recorder, right? If we're not using it that way, just click off the video. It works great. And then you save it as an MP4 or as an MPA, and you can open it up quickly on lots of different devices. So there's also those interactive whiteboards. I mentioned those earlier. I want to mention them again. What a great way to put out a math problem. What a great way to be able to put in visual representation of what I'm thinking. So instead of a Google Doc or Google Slide or something that's more writing based, it's an interactive whiteboard. I can use shapes, I can use colors, I can use numbers, I can use text, I can use images. Interactive whiteboards, there's a number of them, and I've listed several of them down below here. So those are all tools that I can use to be able to demonstrate what I know. And by the way, things like Explain Everything, or even using my camera that displays my text, I can record this, right? So I could actually record what I'm doing, auditorily walk you through how I'm trying to complete this math problem, maybe just for one problem, upload it. So even though I don't have a chance to be able to be with everyone at once, I can then listen and get inside your head and realize that's why you're doing that problem wrong. That's what the steps you're missing wrong. Now, let me give you some guidance when I see you again face-to-face or virtually, or I could record my own support back to you, or refer you back to something I created to illustrate and reinforce those steps. The list of things goes on. And the level of use is can be very basic in terms of the interactive whiteboard, because the tools are allowed so many different options, or it could be much more involved depending upon the needs and the abilities of the learner. All right, and by the way, this is one of several, right? Jamboard, et cetera, offers that. But of course, in terms of demonstrating, I better be using, or at least looking to use, speech to text. It's gotten so much better this last year, just in Google Docs, but also other tools. I'm seeing increasingly apps and other supports that involve any type of text generation is offering the speech to text. Alexa, I love you, because she has developed and learned. We've all been participants of it. And yes, she does listen to us. Feel free to say certain things. And then next, you know, you get advertisements in the mail or whatever. Not in the mail. What's the mail? You'll get phone. I don't know. It happens. We've all had our Alexa moment. I'll stop that. Where am I going, Sean? What I'm trying to say is that speech to text for students that have difficulty with their ability to enunciate, their ability to articulate. I've got a young man a couple bedrooms down the hall that has that challenge, and yet speech to text is getting better because it is becoming much more forgiving. Don't ignore it, and a number of tools are increasingly embedding that tool in there. Google's is, of course, one of them. Google Docs is one of them. All right, but another thing I'm going to do for demonstration is back to the directions I want to provide. And that is, in the directions, I want to make sure that I'm providing clear and consistent one. We mentioned those earlier for multiple means of representation, but HyperDocs and others allow me to create clickable visual directions that align to the weekly, daily, or step-by-step element of the assignment. So again, many of us are doing it. I just feel that's something that is worth my time because, of course, I'm going to use that every single year, and I can use it with a child. and the teacher that's helping me this year more so, as well as the parent at home. My goodness, it's such a 3 for 4 for whatever. And of course, there's also the use of check-ins, right? Check-ins for the day. At the end of the day, let's do a video check-in. Let's do a formative check-in. Many of us have been doing this with Google Forms or other tools like that. And I'm not being paid by Google. I apologize by using Google Classroom a lot. I know some of us are using Seesaw and others. I just use it as an example because it tends to be a little bit more universal. I know a number of Catholic schools here in the Kansas City area that made a decision. They needed to accommodate K all the way through 8, and Classroom was where they went. So just as an example, but other learning management tools that you have that allow you to create quick little forms for formative assessment, but also for check-ins. How are things going? Did you complete it? An end of a task. You have completed the task. From a transition perspective, good, I know I'm done. Now here's another checklist for the next step. It could be very visual, and it's really not checking, it's a visual representation. That's called a visual schedule. Very effective. Many tools allow us to do it. So let's do it. And of course, we can offer text to go along with it as well. All right, that's something because of time I'm going to skip, but I'm not going to skip video. Now, video offers lots of different options, and many of us have been overwhelmed with video. Maybe some of us have drowned with video. Some of us, video has become a very good friend. Awesome. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of different considerations with video. Now, at the bottom of this presentation, I've had schoolvirtually.org. I want you to know schoolvirtually.org is a website some colleagues and I created a little more back in March of last year. So what is that, a little less than a year ago? And that offers a number of different ways of using these digital tools for all learners within the framework. And we have some good examples of using this with video. So I'll let you take a look at that at your leisure, but I want to emphasize a few things. First of all, when we create our video, many of us, we need to cue. And so, yes, this is a poor example with Sherlock Holmes, but there he is with some text. But the video we create, we need to think about the variety of learners. So yes, we might have an image. Yes, we might have some narration to go along with it. But what else are we doing to cue what we're trying to offer as an example? Are we offering an arrow? Are we offering an emphasis to it? Are we offering a pause to it? Are we offering additional text, which I wouldn't recommend just because text then offers another element for our readers. That's a struggle. But however we're doing it, we're going to need an editing tool that allows us to do that component. So therefore, think about that when you're selecting the video tool you use. Sean, what do you use? I use Camtasia. Camtasia allows me a lot of different elements. It's about $100, and it's something the university has invested in. And so I went with it and learned it, and they have a lot of different components to create a lot of different tools for this. So whatever you have access to, there'll be an editing function. And we talked about chunking before, but segment for a purpose, provide supports around that purpose, embed it within some other resources for that purpose. So individuals understand it's just not a standalone video. And I believe I'm preaching to the choir there. This is an example of segmenting, but I'm going to move on from there. Weed out the basic information. This is a great example here of Khan Academy, Sol Khan, which is a great tool, utilizing basically math manipulatives. And I'll let you look at this at your leisure. Well, you know what? I'll show it real quick. He's going to show some virtual manipulatives.
Plus one is equal to 2. Now, I know what you're thinking. That was too easy. So let me give you something a little bit more difficult. I like the avocados. I might stick with that theme. What is 3 plus 4? This is, I think, a more difficult problem. Well, let's go. Let's stick with the avocados. And in case you don't know what an avocado is, it's actually a very delicious fruit. It's actually the fattiest of all the fruits. You probably didn't even think it was a fruit, even if you ate one.
So there's Saul, and I've used this example for years because I think it just hits home. And that is the avocado is the manipulative, which is awesome. But the video now has taken me off thinking about avocados as the juiciest of all fruits, the fattiest of all fruits. It's a fruit. I thought it was a vegetable. And the list of things goes on. So make sure in your video selection now going forward, but also what you're creating is very relevant, very concrete, and very explicit to what you're expecting of the learner. If you go sideline on them, they're going to go sideline with you. And of course, for our struggling learners and those with disabilities, that's not what they need. So consider that. Lastly, consider the modality. Many of us have used BrainPop and things of that nature. And I use BrainPop as an example, and I'm not going to show the example here. You can click on it at your leisure. But the emphasis here is this is great to set up context. Brain Pop is awesome to get us thinking about an idea, introducing an idea, visually making connections, anchoring our understanding. For thorough instruction, for step-by-step, not so good. So the modality for me here is more of, it's going to introduce, it's going to anchor, connect from something previous. That's an awesome way to use it. And I'm going to use it that way versus we kind of oftentimes misuse information, video, depending upon what we have access to. But I'm also going to use this for everything from virtual, as I mentioned before, a video could be a virtual exit slip, everything from a temperature check to what I understand, what I got out of it, my big ideas. It could explain a math problem, as I mentioned before. It could be a peer review in terms of writing that we're actually going to record as we're trying to do. Now, many of us that are face-to-face, no, we're not going to do that, Sean. Well, then maybe we'll allow students, as my sister is, creating rubrics, and then at home, they're facilitating things from I'm going to organize it as a presentation versus an essay, as I've done before. Well, Sean, that's not what a first grader is going to do. Well, maybe it's I can create a how-to video on something I'm learning in terms of basic spelling. Maybe it's I'm going to go outside now that the weather's starting to get a little bit nicer and show you some of the elements of the basic things I'm learning in nature, or connecting between words I'm learning, or colors or shapes. But the ability to be able to then videotape and then send back, you know, it goes on and on and on. And many of our learners now with the devices, the cameras are there, they can use video in so many different ways. On our end, we need to structure the directions. We need to structure things like the rubrics for them to understand. And rubrics can be very basic and visual for our young learners, as well as much more advanced for some of our older learners and more learners with more abilities. So a host of different things to do. Now with that, and I gave an example of my own son using it, but you know, really think about what you're going to use for the purpose. And is it to capture the video? Is it to edit? Is it to display? Really think about those various tools. Back to that list of 350 plus online tools, all those tools you've learned about with video elements, think about that in your selection process. And I've given you some hyperlinks to that as well. In addition, as you're thinking about those videos, how are you going to organize those concepts? How are you going to storyboard those ideas? Depending upon the level of your learner and what you're asking them to do, some pre-planning would be awesome. And that pre-planning gets them an opportunity to visually display the information, and you visually display the information, to sequence it, to organize it, to show comprehension based on that task before they even get to the video. My goodness, this could be the assessment. The video could be fun. Of course, video is going to be fun regardless. But anyways, that's another element to be thinking about when we're thinking about that representation. So video offers lots of different ideas. I've given you some tools for that. I could go on and on and on, but I have time restrictions. So let me go to our third way of thinking about these digital tools. So I mentioned engagement earlier. Let's come back to engagement. And of course, from a universal design for learning perspective, it has three primary guidelines. It has a variety of checkpoints. And again, we mentioned this earlier, and here's a hyperlink. This is hyperlinked to the CAS website, as I've done with the other two. They're the three guidelines. They're the various checkpoints to be able to optimize, facilitate, operationalize engagement in our classrooms. So with that said, you know, prior to the pandemic, there was kind of a floating around out there, UDL's top 10 rules of engagement. And I've hyperlinked this actually to a source. I can't recall who created it, but not only do they list it, but then they give you examples of how to do these things. And so I list this here to kind of get us thinking about the fact that, yeah, when we're trying to engage, there's a host of things we want to focus in on that align to the framework, but also kind of operationalize what engagement looks like. And many of us are doing this, right? Flexible options for assessment, we just mentioned. Authentic and relevant examples. Now, 6 through 10, look at number 7, increase opportunities for collaboration. And that's huge. As I mentioned before with the Google slide, that ability for them to then get the instruction from me, but also then collaborate with others. And there's a number of digital tools that allow us to do that synchronously and asynchronously. Being live, of course, asynchronously being when I come back to it, someone else has already done something, I add to it, a list of things goes on. So there's a number of different things going on there that are very, very relevant. So with that, I mentioned before collaboration and engagement. I mentioned Google Slides earlier. I have some resources there. We talked about this here earlier. But of course, we can then extend it to interactive whiteboards, because Explain Everything, as I mentioned, as one, Jamboard is another. They offer us to get online together if we want to collaborate. And in being online together, I can then use the tools of the interactive whiteboard to then facilitate that instruction and that, facilitate their ability to demonstrate what they know. Real-time collaboration that will allow for that level of engagement. That may be a little bit too much for some of our learners, but a great tool for others. And of course, I mentioned Jamboard, there's another. Now, Padlet's another that I like Padlet particularly because Padlet allows me in a very basic way I could take a picture of myself and tell you how I'm feeling from an assessment perspective, but also a group of us could take pictures and share them together, and we're all maybe socially at a distance, and maybe we quickly take down our mask if we're allowed to, or when we're home, we're taking a picture of silliness to represent who we are. We put that all up on the Padlet. Oh my gosh, what a great way to be able to collaborate in a very basic way. But Padlets, we can also create structure, and individuals can go on, again, synchronously and asynchronously, to be able to add to, modify, change, which again, generally adds to engagement. We know that connection with others adds to a level of engagement. And Padlet is another tool that does that. Many of us are using it. And many of us that use Padlet know that there's a variety of different formats that we can create in, and of course, in real time facilitate in. Now, I'm going to quickly go through 10 things for engagement and then call it a day. And I know I've already gone fairly quickly, but getting to know your student is key to levels of engagement. And you're like, Sean, it's March. I know my student. Yeah, at the same time, I'm continually, depending upon what I'm asking of my student, surprised in what I'm finding out about that student, what they can and cannot do. And so depending upon the activity I'm about to approach, I may ask them in a different way. And in so doing, I can potentially personalize, individualize, and better support. That schedule is critical. Right? Creating a visual schedule. Many of us have done it time and time again. I believe, in all honesty, in creating schedules, there's never a perfect schedule. We can always aspire to that schedule that supports the learner, supports the people at home trying to facilitate, and supports the peers that are working with each other, et cetera, et cetera. And there's several different tools that facilitate that. We mentioned inside our learning management system, but also tools that are outside as well. So a number of different apps. Of course, the schedule needs to be visual. We know that for a lot of our learners. We can communicate the day, the week, operationalizing step by step. We should be communicating transitions, right? That checklist that tells me I'm done. Yay! That schedule that facilitates that we're about to be complete or we're about to begin. We know that reduces behavior, especially face-to-face as well as from afar. So transitions and understanding when they are. Of course, small group structure, and many of us have used breakout rooms, but we've also used various tools that I mentioned before to facilitate that interaction when they can't be at a poster board, drawing things together, touching the same markers and all that, and within too close. Some of those technologies allow us to facilitate that small group, as we already mentioned. Of course, reinforcement. Many of us know that. I'm going to skip that for the moment, but setting expectations. And this is where, yes, the simple stuff in terms of how to use our digital tools, but that continually going back to setting expectations, to me, reduces some of the off tasks, reduces some of the behavior. And there's a number of different tools that allow us to facilitate that, allow us to model it, allow us to mentor it, and the list of things goes on. It's a great way to enhance engagement. But of course, we've also talked about altering ways to represent. That was one of the things we talked about earlier. But of course, in doing so, choice charts, present with a variety of different things that will make the connection that will enhance our engagement. Many of us have been zooming in with or connecting with, even though we're face-to-face, experts from afar. That's been very, very helpful. Now that we have this medium where more and more people, like today, we're utilizing this medium in a way, connecting with an expert grandma or grandpa, or connecting with a colleague, or doing a site visit from afar with another classroom. These are all available to be able to connect with that enhanced engagement. Of course, many of us are using lots of different games and simulations. And in so doing, we're not only offering that reinforcement, but we're also engaging. And then the last two, and then we'll call it a day in terms of any questions and give you a chance to transition to the final presentation here, is the check-ins. I've mentioned this before. Honestly, folks, I've done presentations, several hour-long presentations on progress monitoring and checking in and checklists. They're critical, right? There's that book on checklist manifesto. They're critical for us. They're critical for our learners. They're critical for the adults supporting our learners. They offer the prompts. They offer the visuals. There's so many different ways to create them. And in so doing, it also allows, like if it's creating Google Forms and other things, for us to see what's been done, to see how they created it, to see how they completed it. And then finally, I'm not going to give this any justice, but formative assessment, right? Formative assessment allows us to give that feedback. First of all, a lot of the tools we're seeing now, Google Forms and Kahoots, et cetera, it will give us a dashboard of the data to see how the student is doing, depending upon how we organized it. So not only is it formative feedback where we're trying to get that and see it from a visual perspective, but also in many of these tools, we can embed our feedback as they respond. So if they select that correct answer, we can have that feedback from us, audio recorded, text in terms of reinforcement, a visual in terms of reinforcement. And we don't have to do it into a tool like Google Forms. We can do it in a host of others where it's preset. So we don't have to be there with the child over their shoulder saying, great work. We can offer that from an engagement perspective, but also formative feedback to know where they are from a dashboard perspective. Oh, I got those right. Look at that. Content management systems offer that, as well as our learning management systems. So I covered a bunch. I hope what I covered was helpful. I hope it offered you an understanding of some of these digital tools. There's so many more I could have covered. I hope it got you thinking just a bit, and by connecting it to the UDL framework, made you appreciate better how to utilize that framework in some of your planning. So in a way, you got both Christy and my presentation and only attended mine. And of course, if you have questions and the like, I'm not sure, did I put in, yeah, there you go. There's my email address. Feel free to reach out. That school virtually illustrates a lot of what I've just talked about, but the presentation that Susan can put in the chat again offers hyperlinks to much of what I shared. So I'm going to stop sharing now and bring it back over to Susan and see what questions there might be, if there are any.
Thank you so much. So I put Dr. Smith's presentation in the chat one more time. And again, we'll also put that will be in the virtual attendee hub where this recorded session will be. And I know you were referencing your colleague, Dr. Bonfiglio, Christy, who's doing UDL right now. That was recorded as well. You guys can go back and watch that, put these things together, share them with your colleagues, all kinds of good stuff. So I don't see any, I think we got the one question, but I thought I'd give us a second here to talk through if anybody's got any questions.
No worries if you don't. I know it's late in the day.
We're at the end of this wonderful ride together. So thank you so much, Sean. Sorry, Dr. Smith. Thank you so much. I mean,
There's
so much I've learned from you as a friend, as a parent, as a colleague. I just love it. So I want to give you a couple of housekeeping things. Like I said, there were all of this is going to be recorded. The attendee hub that you logged into, this recording will be there. Give it till tomorrow. Just being honest with you, give it till tomorrow. And we'll also put your materials in there. Sorry, long end of the day here.
It's all right.
The other thing I would encourage you, I mean, if you guys we love to follow, and if you want to follow us on social media, we try to keep in touch with people that way and things that are happening with us. If Dr. Smith comes to speak to us again, we'll make sure that that's there. And we love to share our experiences through that as well. We're on Instagram and Facebook, Fire Foundation. So we're gonna head on over. What do you think? Let's head on over to the wrap-up session. If you guys will log out of this and head over there. And we are grateful for your time. Sean, thank you so much.
Yep. Have a great afternoon, guys, and good luck with the rest of the school year.
Perfect. Thank you. We'll see you in the next session, everybody.